his challenge to the Orientalists. Please welcome wa salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. So this is our my third TED talk anyway in the month of Ramadan, and today I have chosen this subject of Orientalism, which was actually formally put forward by Edward Said, who was the late Edward Said, who was a Palestinian Christian scholar. He was a professor at Columbia University and was one of the most articulate persons in this space. To just give you an idea of how this idea, the concept of Orientalism affects us even today, you will have noticed that one of the slogans of the Leave faction in the EU referendum was that if we stay in the EU, we will be open to receiving 80 million Turks. Now, they didn't say what was wrong with these Turks, but it is understood that in the psychology of the West, Turks means something bad. And so we say 80 million Turks, 80 million rogues, thugs, all kinds of misfits will come into Europe. They did not tell us that Turkey once had a civilization when Europe was in darkness under the Ottoman Empire, which matched anything which has come later. So it is this kind of basic understanding which people have in their minds from history and how they have been taught and brought up. Just like people have ideas about race, some people think very badly about black people, some people think white people think badly about us, and so on. Just to give you an example of that, there is an exhibit in one of the museums here, which is the head, fully decorated head, actually physically also with the head of a Maori leader from New Zealand. Maoris, of course, were the original people of New Zealand. This British colonialist, when he went there, he said, "This is a very nice person with his decoration and so on. Why don't we chop his head off and take it?" And they brought it here. See, they never thought that this is a human being there, right? And so this is the kind of thing which has been there. Or, just to give you one more before we move into the substance of the talk, is when you go to India or Singapore or that part of the world, and you go to the universities, and if you are not aware, you say, "Where is the Department of Middle Eastern Studies?" And they say, "What do you mean Middle Eastern Studies?" For us, this is West Asian Studies. It is not the Middle East for us, this is west of us, and it is in Asia. So we have to think differently of these things than what you think from here. So Europe has been thinking on this all the time, and all the time regarding itself as superior to the people of the East. So when you now talk about Orientals, you talk about things like, you might have heard an expression in English called, "This is Byzantinian," which means it is so complex, I cannot understand it. It is weird, it is something weird. We don't need to go into it, it's Byzantinian, okay? Now, Edward Said wanted to bring some rigor into this thinking and seeing whether this kind of psychological background influences the thinking of a whole generation of scholars and so on. His particular interest was in the way the Palestinian people were conceived of. Because if you read even somebody like Sir Winston Churchill carefully, we find in Churchill's writing sometimes things which are incomprehensible. For example, in the 1920s in Iraq, when the British were invading Iraq that time, Churchill is reported to have said, really, what is wrong in gassing a few Arabs? This was using chemical weapons at that time. He didn't find anything wrong in using chemical weapons on Iraqis at that time, okay? And the Iraqis will remember that well. Churchill later is reported to have said about the Palestinian people, because with the duplicitous Balfour Declaration, which said that the British government is committed to providing a homeland for the Jews, for the Jewish people, at the same time respecting the rights of the Palestinians, indigenous people of Palestine. So Churchill was asked, now look, this is in the 40s, what is happening is not right. The Palestinian people are being displaced, are being ethnically cleansed. And he says, really, actually, these people haven't done anything for thousands of years. Why don't we allow new people to do something more useful in that area? He doesn't care about the indigenous people of Palestine. So, Edward Said now looks at all this and says, let's see how we are building our scholarship on Palestine. Are we trying to justify the genocide and ethnic cleansing of Palestine on the basis that really it doesn't matter, these people do not matter, it's fine, we can do. And you can see what's been happening in Israel. From a majority of the people and land belonging to the indigenous Palestinian people, it is now gone over to the other side, and the Palestinians are encircled in enclaves, very much like apartheid enclaves, okay? And Edward Said now goes to scholars who try to justify this on the basis of culture and learning and civilization. And then he generalizes that into a theory of Orientalism, and he finds Orientalist biases in every scholar. So, for example, in the 60s, late 60s, when Edward Said was writing this book, which is one of the masterpieces of the last few years, called Orientalism, actually, he found a very duplicitous discourse. For example, if a Muslim scholar came and said, okay, I believe that the Quran is the book of God, and I believe in the Prophet, and so on, and now we will start our research. They used to tell him, you are biased. Because how can you say, I believe? I don't believe, so how can we talk on the same language? So Edward Said is saying, fine. You are saying you believe that the Eastern people are bad, ruffians, barbarians. All these terms come from reference to the East. They only like to have luxury and harems and this and that. So how do you start from there? Why don't you say, let's talk on one-to-one, right? That where was better civilization and what did you learn from them? And then we can take this discourse further. And then he will say, no, we are not biased, we are objective scholars. And Edward Said took down the whole edifice. And now, every scholar in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, until recently, now they have stopped, every scholar who started working on those areas first had to write a few pages saying that I am not a typical Orientalist. I am more. So Edward Said had put the cat among the pigeons, right? Just to finish, if you think that this is something new, the idea of Oriental despotism originates in the Greeks. Greek thought actually came up with this idea that these people are different from us. We are civilized, these are different. So when Alexander, for example, went to Persia and conquered Persia, he said the king of Persia, Darius at that point, was a despot, Oriental despot, although Persia was quite an advanced civilization at that time. coming down, even scholars who were not religious, who were not oriented towards Western colonialism and so on, and we are referring here to, say, somebody like Karl Marx. Karl Marx says, my theory doesn't apply to the Orientals. The Oriental mode of production is outside the scope of my thesis. Max Weber said, Oriental despotism doesn't apply to my theory. These people are different, they are beyond thinking. And so what Edward Said puts in this picture is that really there is more than one way of looking. And when you create into people's minds a picture of a culture, of a people, which is wrong and flawed, you get what we got with this poster on Turkey. The people automatically associate a whole people with all kinds of weird imaginations they have. So inshallah, next week, we'll take a similar theme on how the black people, African people, have been treated in the United States on this thesis. Assalamu alaikum.
إن الله